You're sitting across from someone you care about, and they ask you a simple question. What do you want? And suddenly, your mind goes blank. Not because you don't know, but because somewhere deep in the architecture of your nervous system, there's a whisper that says, what I want doesn't matter as much as what keeps this person happy with me. You smile. You defer. You say, I'm fine with whatever you prefer. And in that moment, you've done it again. You've traded a small piece of your authentic self for the currency of acceptance. It feels natural, automatic, like breathing. But here's what most people don't understand about people-pleasing. It's not kindness. It's not generosity. It's not even really about them. It's a survival mechanism that once saved you from something unbearable, rejection, conflict, abandonment, or the terrifying sensation of being too much or not enough. And now, years later, that same mechanism has become a prison where you perform for love instead of receiving it for who you actually are. This is the core paradox of the people-pleaser. The very strategy that once kept you safe now keeps you invisible. The thing that earned you belonging has exiled you from yourself. You've become so skilled at reading the room, anticipating needs, managing other people's emotions, that you've forgotten how to simply be in a room without a role to play. You've spent so long being the person others needed that you no longer know who you are when no one is watching. And the cruelest part? Everyone thinks you're fine, happy even, because that's what you've trained them to see. But inside, there's an exhaustion that never lifts, a resentment that simmers beneath the compliance, a voice that occasionally breaks through the performance and asks, when is it my turn? When do I get to be the one who's taken care of? Today, we're going to dismantle the psychology of people-pleasing, not to shame it, but to understand it. Because beneath every people-pleaser is a child who learned that their authentic self wasn't safe, wasn't wanted, or wasn't enough. And that child is still running the show, still trying to earn a love that should have been freely given.
Let's be precise about what we're discussing here. People-pleasing is not occasional kindness or healthy accommodation. It's a compulsive pattern of self-abandonment rooted in what psychologists call anxious attachment and conditional belonging. Think of it like this. Imagine your nervous system as a surveillance system that's always scanning for threat. But for the people-pleaser, the threat isn't a predator or physical danger. It's relational rupture. It's disapproval. It's the possibility that if you express a need, set a boundary, or reveal your authentic feelings, the people you depend on will withdraw their love. This is where the concept of Fawn Response becomes critical. We've all heard of fight, flight, and freeze, but fawn is the fourth trauma response, and it's the most socially invisible. Fawning is the survival strategy of becoming what others need you to be in order to stay safe. It's not conscious manipulation, it's neurological protection. Your nervous system learned early that compliance equals safety, that appeasing others prevents pain. Many people-pleasers experienced what's called parentification in childhood, a role reversal where they became emotional caretakers for their parents or family system. Perhaps you had a parent who was emotionally volatile and you learned to manage their moods. Perhaps you had a parent who was depressed or overwhelmed and you became their therapist, their confidant, their reason to smile. You learned that your value was tied to your utility, your emotional labor, your ability to make others feel better. And here's what that does to a developing brain. It hijacks the attachment system. Attachment theory tells us that children need to know their needs matter, that they can express distress and receive comfort, that they can be themselves and still be loved. But when a child learns the opposite, that their needs are burdensome, that their emotions are too much, that love is something they must earn through service, their brain rewires around performance. The default mode network, the brain's self-referential system, begins to organize around a single question. What do they need from me? Rather than, what do I need? The people-pleaser's sense of self becomes externalized. They construct their identity from external appraisals, from how others respond to them, rather than from an internal knowing. This creates what psychologists call a false self, a persona constructed entirely for external consumption. The true self, with its raw needs and messy feelings and inconvenient desires, gets locked away, not because it's bad, but because it once felt dangerous to reveal it.
Let me tell you what people-pleasing actually costs you, because this is where the real tragedy lives. It costs you the ability to know yourself. When you've spent your entire life asking, what do they want, you lose access to the question, what do I want? Your preferences atrophy. Your desires become murky. You can make everyone else happy, but you couldn't tell someone your favorite movie or what you genuinely like to do on a Saturday if your life depended on it, because you genuinely don't know anymore. It costs you authentic relationships, because here's the painful truth. When people only know your false self, they don't actually know you. They love the version of you that never disagrees, never disappoints, never asks too much. And somewhere deep down, you know this. You know that if they saw the real you, the messy, needy, occasionally selfish you, they might leave. So you remain in relationships where you are chronically unseen, chronically lonely, surrounded by people but profoundly isolated. It costs you your anger. People-pleasers are often terrified of their own rage because they've spent decades suppressing it. But that anger doesn't disappear. It goes underground. It becomes passive aggression, chronic lateness, forgotten commitments, psychosomatic illness. Your body keeps the score of every boundary you didn't set, every yes you meant as no, every time you betrayed yourself to keep the peace. Carl Jung once wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." For the people-pleaser, this statement hits differently, because accepting yourself completely means accepting that you have needs, that you are allowed to take up space, that your no is just as sacred as your yes, and that acceptance threatens the entire architecture of your relational world. There's an invisible grief here that no one talks about, the grief of having abandoned yourself, of having spent years, maybe decades, treating your own heart like an inconvenience, of having prioritized everyone else's comfort over your own humanity. This is a form of self-betrayal so constant, so normalized, that you don't even recognize it as violence. But it is. It's violence you've been taught to commit against yourself. Philosophy has long grappled with the concept of authenticity versus social conformity. The existentialists warned us about bad faith, living according to external expectations rather than internal truth. Kierkegaard spoke of the sickness unto death, a despair that comes from failing to be yourself. This is the people-pleaser's curse, to be so consumed with being what others need that you never risk becoming who you actually are. And the fear beneath it all, the fear
is that your authentic self is fundamentally unlovable, that the real you, with needs and limits and rough edges, is too much or not enough. So you perform, you perfect, you please, and in doing so, you ensure that the question remains forever unanswered.
So what does this look like in adult life? How does childhood people-pleasing metastasize into the patterns that define your relationships, your career, your entire existence? You might find that you can't receive compliments. Someone praises you, and your immediate reflex is to deflect, minimize, or redirect attention, because accepting that you did something worthy of recognition without having to work for it, earn it, or qualify it feels dangerously vulnerable. Your nervous system was trained to believe that value comes from utility, not from simply existing. You might find that you overfunction in every relationship. You're the therapist friend, the one who remembers everyone's birthdays, the one who organizes, mediates, and emotionally manages. But when you're struggling, you minimize. You say you're fine. You'd rather suffer in silence than risk burdening someone else because asking for help feels like exposing your fundamental unworthiness. You might find that your generosity is laced with resentment. You say yes to things you don't want to do. You give more than you can afford, time, money, energy, and then later you feel angry about it. But you can't express that anger directly because it would reveal that your giving wasn't actually free. It was a transaction. You were buying connection with compliance, and now you're furious that it hasn't worked. You might find that you apologize for existing. Sorry to bother you. Sorry, this might be a stupid question. Sorry for taking up space. You've learned to preemptively apologize for having needs, as if your very presence is an imposition. This is the language of someone who learned early that they must justify their existence through usefulness. You might find that you struggle with decision-making. Even small choices, where to eat, what movie to watch, become paralyzing. Because making a choice means asserting a preference, and asserting a preference means risking that others won't like it, won't approve, will be disappointed. So you defer. You say, I don't care. But you do care. You just learned that caring out loud is dangerous. You might find that you cannot tolerate conflict. Any disagreement feels like relationship apocalypse. You'd rather betray your own position than sit in the discomfort of someone being upset with you. So you become the peacekeeper, the mediator, the one who smooths everything over. But in doing so, you ensure that your own voice remains perpetually unheard. You might find that you're exhausted all the time, because managing everyone else's emotional landscape while suppressing your own is neurologically expensive. Your nervous system is in a constant state of hypervigilance, scanning for cues about how to be, what to say, how to make sure everyone stays happy. This is not sustainable. This is a recipe for burnout, for anxiety disorders, for a life lived entirely outside yourself. Here's what's crucial to understand. These are not personality flaws. These are coping strategies. These are the brilliant, adaptive ways a child learned to survive in an environment where their authentic self wasn't safe. But you're not that child anymore. And the environment that required this strategy no longer exists, even if your nervous system hasn't gotten the memo. The first step toward change is not fixing yourself. It's witnessing yourself. It's recognizing the pattern without shame. It's understanding that every time you say yes when you mean no, you're not being kind. You're reenacting an old trauma. You're confirming to yourself that your authentic feelings are still not safe, still not welcome, still something to be managed and hidden. So how do you heal from this? How do you dismantle a survival strategy that's been running your life since before you had language for it? The work begins with what therapists call reparenting yourself. This means becoming the adult for your inner child that you needed but didn't have. It means learning to ask yourself, what do I need right now? And then, this is the hard part, actually honoring that answer. Even when it disappoints someone, even when it creates conflict, even when it feels selfish. Because here's what you must understand. Taking care of yourself is not selfish. Setting boundaries is not cruel. Saying no is not abandonment. These are acts of self-respect. And until you can respect yourself, no amount of external validation will ever be enough. Part of this work involves what Carl Jung called shadow work, integrating the parts of yourself you've disowned. For people pleasers, this often means integrating your anger, your neediness, your selfishness. Not acting on every impulse, but acknowledging that these parts exist, that they're human, that they don't make you unlovable. It means learning that you can be imperfect and still worthy. You can have needs and still be valuable. You can take up space and still belong. You'll need to practice something that will feel almost impossible at first, disappointing people on purpose. Not because you want to hurt them, but because you need to rewire your nervous system's response to disapproval. Start small. Say no to something you'd normally agree to. Express a preference. Let someone be briefly annoyed with you and notice that the relationship survives. Notice that the world doesn't end. Notice that you're still okay. This is about choosing softness toward yourself instead of constant striving. It's about recognizing that you don't have to earn your place at the table. Your existence itself is enough. You are not a function. You are not a utility. You are a human being with inherent worth. And that worth does not fluctuate based on how much you give, how much you do, or how much you shrink yourself to make room for others. There's a Buddhist concept called metta, or loving kindness, that people pleasers desperately need to extend toward themselves. You've spent your whole life being compassionate toward others. What would it look like to be that compassionate toward yourself? To treat your own needs with the same urgency you treat everyone else's? To defend your own boundaries the way you defend a friend's? Psychologist Kristen Neff, who studies self-compassion, found that people who practice self-compassion are actually more capable of authentic generosity, because their giving comes from overflow, not from depletion. When you take care of yourself first, you can help others from a place of genuine abundance rather than desperate transaction. Here's the truth that will set you free. The people who truly love you want to know the real you. They want your honest no as much as your genuine yes. They want to see you as a full human being, not a service provider. And the people who can't handle your authenticity, they were never your people to begin with. You weren't losing their love by setting boundaries. You were revealing that their love was always conditional. The psychiatrist Donald Winnicott once wrote, "It is a joy to be hidden and disaster not to be found." For people pleasers, this hits at the core wound. You've been hiding your entire life, performing a version of yourself that keeps others comfortable. But no one has found you. The real you remains unseen, unknown, untouched by genuine love. The healing is in letting yourself be found, messy, imperfect, needy, and whole. This journey is not about becoming someone new. It's about excavating who you've always been beneath the performance. It's about coming home to yourself after a lifetime of